What's up, everybody? Matthew here. Thanks for checking into the channel. It is August, late August of 2025, but I am nevertheless in this video going to predict very, very accurately exactly what's going to happen in the PCA's Nationalism Committee, the Christian Nationalism Study Committee that we basically launched at this year's General Assembly. It should come back in several months, in a year's time, next summer in the 2026 General Assembly, perhaps even sometime thereafter. Depends on the progress that's going to be made. But you don't need to wait that long, because I'm going to tell you in this video right now exactly what's going to happen in the Christian Nationalism Study Committee, the PCA. And I'm going to do so with fairly accurate precision. Now you're wondering how I could possibly do that. Do I see the future? Do I have inside information? No to A and no to B. I can't see the future, and no, I don't have any inside information at all. I'm actually not super connected in the PCA. Some of you might think that, but that's not really true. I came into the PCA only in 2019, so I definitely don't have my fingers in the deep state of the PCA. Never met Kevin DeYoung and so forth. Many of the people that are really intricate in the center of the PCA's comings and goings, I don't know. They don't know me, so I'm sort of an outsider still in the PCA. Matter of fact, let's go have a look real quick here at the PCA's study committee personnel. So here's an article from By Faith. In a minute, I promise, we're going to get to my predictions. Kevin DeYoung, moderator of the 52nd General Assembly, has selected the elders. They will consist of the following. Here they are right here. We've got David Strain, Drew Martin, James Wood, Paul McNulty, Lance Kinzer, Steve Dowling, and Jay Green. Advisory members are Scott Swain and Alan Gulzo. Okay, Scott Swain, I know him. He liked one of my tweets the other day, so that's that's good. But no, I don't have any particular insight into these people. Nobody shared anything with me. But here's how I know exactly what's going to happen in the PCA, Christian Nationalism Study Committee. Here's how I know, because I'm Presbyterian, and we do study committees all the time, and they typically have the same basic format. So I'm going to take you through that format. And because I think I have my finger on the pulse of where the PCA is coming and where it's going, I'm going to be able to, with quite a bit of precision, tell you the mood and even the tone of the study report before it ever even comes out, months before it ever comes out. So let's go ahead and do this. Let me share the screen here. Here's going to be the outline. Screen grab this, August 2025. This is exactly what it's going to look like. First, it's going to start off with the problem. They're going to articulate why it is that this study committee has been convened. And the problem is because Christian nationalism doesn't have a really great definition. I mean, you could certainly go online to Twitter and hear people talking about Christian nationalism all the time, but often in ways that are fairly controversial, even disgusting at times. And so it's not a term that many people view positively. Just look at like CNN's recent interview that they did with Douglas Wilson. But it's a problem because we have a real definitional inconsistency here. And moreover, it's been tied to some really unpalatable other ideas, kind of adjacent ideas that may or may not actually be Christian nationalism. But it's enough of a concern that we launched the study committee. So the first part is going to open up with the problem. And interestingly enough, you know, both sides of this, some people like that term, some people don't. Both sides were kind of happier than I thought that there would be a study committee. Some people liked it that really like Christian nationalism, easy for me to say, because their viewpoints are going to get discussed at a pretty prominent level. Those who hate Christian nationalism are really excited about this because they're hoping that the study committee will smash down and tamper down any kind of enthusiasm for this movement within the PCA. So that'll be the problem. Next, there's going to be a scriptural background in which the study committee goes deep into what the Bible teaches about nations and so forth. So you're going to have a rather large and I think impressive exegetical section on scripture, both the Old and the New Testaments. What does it say? What are the biblical foundations? Next, we're going to get into specifically Reformed theology as it relates to the Westminster Confession, particularly the original Westminster Confession of Faith of the 1640s. After that, it'll take a broadening out in scope to the broader Reformed background. What did other Reformed people believe in other nations besides just Scotland, which is obviously intrinsic to our identity? We'll hear a little bit about England and Scotland and Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium and Switzerland and Calvin and so forth. The real question mark for me is how deeply the committee is going to talk about the Covenanters, because the Covenanters, in my view, are the best representatives, the purest representatives for what we might call a Reformed and Presbyterian version of Christian nationalism. This is sometimes discussed as the doctrine of the mediatorial kingship, which is really clearly articulated, I think, in this book right here, Messiah the Prince, by a Covenanter called William Simonton. More on this book here in just a moment, but let's go back to the outline. Next, they're going to take a trip over across the sea to America, where in 1788 our confessional standards were slightly modified, very, very cautiously updated to fit the American civil magisterial context. Obviously, we don't have a king here in America, and they did in Scotland and England, where the Westminster Confession of Faith was written at Westminster Abbey. Next, we'll look at the North and South Presbyterians, especially as the division takes place in the Civil War over slavery and states' rights and federalism and other important topics. Then the study committee is going to take a very negative turn here, I imagine, as we look at World War II and especially nationalism with Germany. Finally, then, what's going to happen is, go back here. We're going to look at the current concerns of nationalism's ties to kinism, racism, anti-racism, ethno-nationalism, and so forth. And then finally, there's going to be a section on conclusions. Now, again, I'm not trying to brag here necessarily. All I'm telling you is this is exactly what the study committee is going to do, and whether or not the study committee is going to be a success will more or less depend on your valuation of how they articulated these things in these various subset discussion points. Now, here's what they're going to conclude, okay? At least these are my assessments of where the study committee is going to go. First of all, let me say this. The PCA is the best denomination in the world to tackle something like this. And I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying that typically our study committee reports, though they don't have any sort of binding authority, they don't become like constitutional in our Book of Church Order or something like that. Typically, the PCA study reports have been really well done, in my opinion. You may like some more than others. There may be a couple that you think are, kind of clunkers or whatever, but for the most part, the PCA is stacked with incredibly skilled theologians and exegetes, and so you could probably expect this document to be really well researched and written. I do imagine that the exegetical sections will be excellent, as this study committee is stacked with excellent and competent scholars. And there would be a tremendous uproar of fury if the exegetical section was not excellent. So I really do think that this probably will be a very strong leading edge. You're going to be looking at commentary on Romans 13. You're going to be looking at times in which government can and cannot be trusted, reasons for perhaps civil disobedience, a strong section on Christ as the ascended Son of God sitting at the right hand of the Father. This is going to be pretty good. Now, you'll notice, though, that this study committee is going to heavily lean towards the 1788 revisions of the Westminster Confession of Faith, and probably it's going to stilt that way. And the reason that they're going to do that is, number one, the original Westminster Confession of Faith of the 1640s is strongly establishmentarianism. And the mood in the room is going to be to lean away from that towards the 1700s revisions. And the other reason is because the official standards of the PCA are not the 1640s, 1646-47 Westminster Confession of Faith and catechisms, but rather the 1788 revision. So, of course, it's going to lean that way. Not only because it's our official version, but also because I think the mood in the room is going to be leaning against an establishmentarianism, okay? The real question for me is whether or not they're going to gloss over the Covenanters. Now, again, this book by Simonton is considered the best treatment of the doctrine of the mediatorial kingship of Christ from a Presbyterian perspective, but I'm not so sure they're really going to deal with that as expertly and as thoroughly as I would wish. Moreover, the conclusion, I think, has to be a strong anti-racism statement on the part of the PCA. Again, this is sort of a mood in the room moment here where the PCA wants to, I think, tamp down any kinds of hints, suggestions, or overtures that we might in any way be racist, which we're not. And this is kind of funny, at least in the sense that the PCA has already bent over backwards so many times to say that we're not racist. It's almost like the boogeyman in the closet for the PCA that at every other General Assembly, at least, there's some kind of movement to once again say we're not racist and we're sorry that we ever were or that racism ever happened and so forth. So probably the latter third of this document is going to be a strong anti-racism statement. Now, how important you think that is, I don't know. For me, if that's what happens, it'll be a little bit of a dodge of the question because it'll be all too easy to say that we're not racist, as we've done so many times and in as strong words as possible, including this past General Assembly. By the way, I voted for the language of adopting the statement that was shared by the RPCNA as well as the ARP. I voted for that. I hate racism. I think it's stupid and dumb and wrong and evil and all that kind of stuff. But if this document really tries to reestablish that claim again for the umpteenth time, it will be, in my view, a bit of a dodge as to actual question of how nations should be Christian or not. How extreme R2K are we, or rather should we be praying that the magistrate does exactly what Westminster Larger Catechism 191 says and support and countenance the church? Okay, so the conclusion is probably going to be a rather milquetoast kind of room for disagreement type of conclusion. That's going to leave some people happy, especially those who want us to smash racism again, which we've done many times and we'll do again here, no question about that. And it'll say there's some room for people with Covenanter and other establishmentarianism leanings based on our history, especially our Scottish Presbyterian history. So that's exactly what it's going to do. Now, I'll tell you how it's going to fail, if it fails as a document. First, if it ignores Westminster, this should be Larger Catechism 191. If it ignores that or glosses over that, it's going to be a bit of a problem because that is, in fact, what Larger Catechism 191 says. Matter of fact, oh man, I don't have it out on my desk. I'm sorry about that. I'll tell you what, let's do this. Let's go back over here and let's open up. Oh man, wasting time. Where is it? Aha. Creeds and Standards. Let's go to the Larger Catechism. Bear with me, folks. I just want you to see this. We're going to head down to 191. Sorry for the dead air. All right. What do we pray for in the second petition? Answer. This is in regard to the Lord's Prayer. In the second petition, which is thy kingdom come, acknowledging ourselves and all mankind to be by nature under the dominion of sin and Satan, we pray that the kingdom of sin and Satan may be destroyed, the gospel propagated throughout the earth, the Jews called, the fullness of the Gentiles brought in, the church furnished with all gospel officers and ordinances, purged from corruption, countenanced and maintained by the civil magistrate, that the ordinances of Christ may be purely dispensed and made effectual to the converting of those that are yet in their sins, and so forth. So you see here this line right here, that we are to pray that the church would be what? Would be purged from corruption, countenanced and maintained by the civil magistrate. Now, whether you have the original 1646-47 Westminster Confession or whether you have the modified American version, that's still in there. We're supposed to be praying for that. We're supposed to be praying that the nation, our nation, would countenance, which means to favor, and maintain, which is to support the church. The magistrate is supposed to do that very thing. All right, so let's go back to this. And again, it'll fail if it ignores Westminster 191. Likewise, it's going to fail, secondly, if it's weak on two areas of Scottish Presbyterian history, the Scottish National Covenant of 1638 or the Solemn League and Covenant of 1643, which inaugurated the Westminster Assembly. If the study committee is weak on that, it's going to fail. Third, it's going to be a failure if it skims the Old Testament on the nations. How exactly are the nations to come to Messiah? Will it be true that the nations will largely be Christianized, and to what extent is that going to take place? More, it will fail if it ignores Messiah the Prince by Symington. Now, I have a bad feeling in my guts that the study committee is going to, instead of this book, look into some more contemporary descriptions of establishmentarianism or Christian nationalism done by highly controversial online actors. And if they do that, instead of reading Messiah the Prince, in my view, that's going to be a big biff of this committee. Finally, I do predict that the study committee will focus on bad actors and shaming racists rather than reformed history. That's just my fear, okay? I'm just kind of afraid it's going to do that. So probably the best way to avoid this failure is if the authors of the study committee really dive into a book like Messiah the Prince. Now, why do I keep driving home this point? Because the doctrine of the mediatorial kingship of Christ is a doctrine that has been cherished and treasured by Presbyterians throughout our history, as exemplified by our most pure and faithful exhibitors of that doctrine, which would be the Covenanters themselves. Okay, so my fear is that the study committee is going to gloss this and skim it and skip it in favor of kind of these smash down, tamp out exercises related to contemporary bad actors. But if they do that, unfortunately, the problem is what it's going to do is it's going to end up making their document all too temporary. It's going to mean that the document is going to become passé and probably will go out of style and helpfulness rather quickly, because contemporary society, movements, discussions, they change. It could be that in 5 years we're barely talking about this. I don't know. So I would rather see the study committee delve into our real strong Presbyterian heritage as it relates to these doctrines, rather than the kind of more milquetoast and obvious, all too easy tamp out of racism, which we've already done before. Okay, so that's what I'm hoping for. That's what I'm predicting is going to happen. I think you heard it here first. And again, if it happens exactly like this, you can point back to this video and say, Everhard got it exactly right. Thanks for checking in. Love you lots. Talk to you later.